You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding, combating stigma since 2021. I wanted there to be a podcast about hoarding disorder from somebody who hoarded rather than a professional. That didn't exist, so I created it. And that's this podcast that you're listening to now. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? I have considerably fewer germs than I've had for the last few weeks, so that's good. Today I have for you the briefest of housekeepings, and then I am talking about the problem we face when we are trying to sort out our stuff and we have something and we know where it belongs, but we can't get to that place. We can't reach the shelves because of clutter. We can't get to the wardrobe, that kind of thing. Kind of ways through that and ways to think about that. And then I have a top tip that came from one of my friends who heard it on a podcast that is an interesting solution to clothes that are worn out or that you don't want anymore.
Let's start with some housekeeping.
So, the briefest of housekeepings. The next De-Hoarding Accountability Zoom session is on Sunday. It would be amazing to see you there. Grab your ticket and come along at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/ticket. So, I know it's not just me who sometimes is trying to sort things, trying to get my belongings in order. And I have, for instance, some clothes that I want to keep, but I can't get to the wardrobe that they should live in because there is other clutter in the way. And it's a big dilemma. Like, what do I do with them in the meantime? Like, I want to organize these things, but the space itself is blocking me from doing so. Now, I know this isn't just me because people have told me it's not just me. So I'm going to talk about some practical strategies for dealing with this specific problem that a lot of people who hoard face. Let's understand how this problem happens, first of all. When we accumulate and keep a lot of belongings, we get like layers of stuff, whether that's one layer on top of another or more kind of horizontal layers that maybe start in a particular area of a room and extend outwards. And what this means is that our access to spaces, especially storage spaces, can be blocked by items that we own. And this problem compounds over time, especially because it can prevent us from organising the things we do want to keep. And so it creates a proper vicious cycle where we can't put the books on the bookshelf, so the books end up in a pile, which then contributes to not being able to put the next lot of books on the bookshelf. Now, this can feel like a really frustrating situation to be in, and it's very easy to devolve into self-blame and self-recrimination and frustration. I do think it can be helpful to remind ourselves that this isn't an issue of personal failure. It isn't something we should be annoyed with ourselves about or feel shame about. It's something we can understand in the context of how hoarding disorder progresses, both in terms of our thinking and in terms of our physical surroundings. And when we turn a difficulty like that into something to yell at ourselves about, it doesn't solve the difficulty. It doesn't fix the problem if we're extra mean to ourselves. And if anything, it probably makes it worse, because it's a lot harder to motivate yourself when you are telling yourself you're terrible. And it's a lot harder to feel like you deserve a nicer space to live in if you're telling yourself that you're terrible. But one of the things that can happen when we have this problem, say you can't get to a particular cupboard in your kitchen and you find something that belongs in that cupboard, but you can't reach it or you can't open it or something like that. My solution is often, okay, I will put all the things that belong there in the same bag or box, and then they are at least together for when I can access it. But what happens is they go in the bag or box, and that is never opened again. It is lost amongst the other bags and boxes. It is an out of sight, out of mind situation. Those things are essentially lost and never end up where they're meant to go. Another difficulty that this problem creates is we can think, oh, I found this, but it belongs on that shelf that I can't get to. And then we find something else and think, oh, that also belongs on that shelf that I can't get to. And then we find something else and say, oh, I can keep this because it can go on that shelf over there when I can get to it. And then we find another thing and go, oh, this is a keep because that shelf is perfect for it. And because putting all these things on the shelf is kind of hypothetical and almost imaginary at this point, we can also find that what we think belongs on a particular shelf, by the time we've kept everything with the justification of eventually putting it on that shelf, we have kept an unreasonable amount for one shelf to contain. We can assume that one cupboard or one shelf will contain everything in a particular category. But if we have hoarded a large amount of items, then that cupboard or that shelf won't contain all those things. So another difficulty with having this problem is we ascribe a lot of items to a particular space and that if we could access that space wouldn't fit. One key thing to remember when we are trying to deal with this problem is that making progress doesn't require us to have perfect access to a space. We can make progress even if we can't do it perfectly. The only way to make progress is to risk doing it imperfectly and just do it anyway. We have to remember, and it's hard to remember, but we have to remember that we don't need to solve everything before we start. We don't need to have everything sorted and arranged and planned in our head before we're allowed to try and improve our surrounding. What we have to do is start where we are now, not where we wish we were, not where we think we should be, but where we are now. And I'm talking physically and practically, but I'm also talking emotionally and cognitively. I used to do and still do a lot of, oh, if I can just get to a place where it feels easier, that I'll be able to do this. Or if I can just plan the perfect way to do this, then I'll do it and it will be fine. And I do a lot of thinking and planning and a lot less doing. I'm a lot better at this than I used to be. It used to be that I couldn't start at all until I had the perfect plan for the perfect solution. And then if I had the perfect plan for the perfect solution and I started it and it wasn't the perfect plan after all, I would scrap the entire thing and wait again until I had the next perfect plan for the next perfect solution. And learning that you can start imperfectly and work it out as you go has been life-changing. That's not an exaggeration. It's been life-changing in terms of not just sorting my home and making any progress, taking any positive steps in that regard, but in other areas of my life. I can start cooking without fully knowing what the entire meal is going to be. I can start walking without fully knowing where I'm going. I can start a collage without fully knowing what it will look like. And learning and accepting that progress often looks like having something of a plan and then ending up having to do it differently was terrifying and now is incredibly helpful. So starting where we are, not where we wish we were, can be, I am sitting on the sofa and there is a pile of stuff next to me. And rather than working out the perfect, most strategic, most efficient place to start, maybe if I'm too tired to move, the place to start is the pile on the sofa next to me, even if that's not part of the plan, or even if that's not the most urgent space right now. It's still better to do this than not to do it. But starting where we are can also be, I haven't fully worked out a strategy, or I haven't fully worked out how I feel about this, but I'm just going to give it a go anyway. And some of it I will work out as I go. Some of it will become clearer as I go. I don't really know what I'm dealing with until I start, so I can't make the perfect plan. So I'm just going to start. And it's always good to keep in mind that when we can clear a space and make a space more accessible, even if it's a tiny, tiny space, every place that is more clear, that is more accessible, makes it easier to make a slightly bigger space clearer and more accessible, which then makes it easier to make a slightly bigger space clearer and more accessible. So wherever we start, whether it's the perfect, most ideal place or not, it helps to create the conditions for clearing the next space, which helps to create the conditions for clearing the space after that. This podcast is sponsored by Chirp Your Home, a decluttering and organising course for overwhelmed people. Amy, a declutter coach and professional organiser, has condensed down a range of tools and techniques which she's developed with clients over the past 5 years. Chirp Your Home is a course that uses a mixture of reflective exercises and practical tools with lots of options and opportunities to adapt methods to work for you as an individual. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. The course is in audio format with accompanying worksheets, and it's split across 4 modules. If you're worried about finding the time to work through the course, Amy also runs a free body doubling group twice a week that you can use to work through the course in your own time. Visit chirpyourhome.podia.com, that's chirpyourhome.podia.com, and use voucher code OCHPOD for 15% off. Probably the most important thing to keep in mind, and also probably the thing we don't want to hear, is that if we have something that belongs in a wardrobe we can't reach, the problem isn't that we can't get that dress into the wardrobe. The problem is that we have too much stuff. Not being able to get the dress into the wardrobe is an annoyance, and it might make things harder. But that's not the core problem. The core problem is that we have so many possessions that we can't reach the wardrobe. And we need to keep in mind always that we can't organize our way out of having too much stuff. I spent many years thinking I had a organization problem, and if I could just work out the right system to organize my stuff, then I would be fine. I didn't think I had a too much stuff problem. I thought I was just rubbish at organizing it. But I had a too much stuff problem. And I've heard so many professional organisers say that you have to declutter before you organise your possessions. And as I understand it, that's the case whether you hoard or whether you just have a bit of clutter. The getting rid has to happen first. Organising comes after dehoarding, after decluttering, not before. Because we may want to think that we are just the perfect shelving system away from having a home that works. We are just the right pretty box away from having a home that we can feel proud of, but we're not. And until we have dehoarded or decluttered, we can't organise the stuff because we don't know what we're keeping. We don't know what we've got. The problem, if we can't get to a storage area, is that we have so much stuff that we can't get to a storage area. We need to keep that in mind the whole time. If we are organising without decluttering first, what we are doing is rearranging the problem rather than solving the problem. It's like having an unwieldy pile of papers and putting them into alphabetical order. It doesn't solve the problem of having an unwieldy pile of papers. There is a concept that people talk about with dehoarding based around this idea of churn. And every time I say that word, I have to point out that it's one of my least favourite words. It repulses me, so I'll try not to say it again. But basically, that thing is when we move things around rather than dehoard. And we feel like we're doing something. We feel like we're productive. But what we've actually done is separate a pile into two bags that then become a different pile. Things are churning rather than moving. And when we add to that a new shelving unit or a new series of boxes, we are adding clutter and it's taking up more space. It's not solving the problem. And when we can actually dehoard, when we can actually discard items, whether that's through donation, whether that's through selling them, whether that's through throwing them away or recycling them, space opens up. And every bit of space that opens up helps us to open up the next bit of space. And when we have fewer possessions, we do regain access to those shelves and wardrobes and cupboards. And we can maybe clear stuff from those shelves and wardrobes and cupboards knowing that we haven't been able to access them. And so we don't use and haven't used the things on them, maybe for a really long time. And because we have been dehoarding and decluttering, when we do get access to those storage spaces, they are more likely to be sufficient for what we have kept, rather than when we are imagining that every single thing will fit on one small shelf. The shelves aren't the problem. Not being able to get to the shelf because of the volume of objects is the problem. Not being able to put something on the shelf is an annoyance and an obstacle, but the core problem is the volume. So when we spend time organising too much, organising our stuff when that stuff is too much, it feels productive. It feels like we're achieving something, but often we are avoiding letting things go. We're avoiding discarding items. And we need to have some faith that we will come up with the right organising solution as we dehoard, as we actually get rid of things. So I'm a big fan of just picking a spot and starting. We can be strategic. We can go for things like entrances and exits for safety reasons. We can go for, if we have a particular goal, like to open the freezer again, we can work towards that. But I am a big fan of also just working on the spot I'm in, regardless. It all has to be done. But maybe you want to create a path. Maybe you want to focus on a particular category, like clothes or books or magazines or craft stuff. Maybe you want to open some of those bags and boxes that have been there for years and you don't know what's in them. But we can clear some space and then allow that to reveal what our next priority is without having a comprehensive plan from start to finish. This is all overwhelming, and it is fine to pause and break and take stock. It is important to celebrate when we do make progress, even if it looks and feels tiny, or even if we know it's momentous, but we feel like it would look tiny to someone else. Give yourself a cheer. Give yourself a pat on the back. Because when we see progress and when we allow ourselves to feel proud of that progress, that creates more momentum for clearing the space and making more space and ultimately being able to get to the shelf that feels so impossible currently. It is important to also say that if we have piles or accumulations of objects, don't be tempted to clamber over them and climb and balance on precarious piles. Don't create an unsafe situation for yourself physically. If you can ask for help, this can be a good time to do that. But the key is to work on the stuff that's blocking access to the shelves, not to put yourself in physical danger by trying to climb unsteady piles of stuff. All of this is about small steps that create momentum, and rather than obsessing over the perfect way to preserve every item, making ourselves acknowledge that the problem is volume, the problem is accumulation, is, I think, the only way we can really solve this specific problem of I can't organize this because I can't reach my cupboards. The space is there. We need to remove items to get to it, to reveal it, to see what we're dealing with. We don't need to get to the shelves as much as we need less stuff in our homes. Everything we can discard brings us closer. And the practicalities of should I put this in a bag or a box or a transparent space or in a pile is far less important than, okay, wow, I have so much stuff that I haven't reached my wardrobe in 5 years. Things will become reachable, but only when and if we dehoard. It's a hard thing to hear, but it feels like the only way through.
It's top tip time.
So my top tip this week came from one of my friends who heard it on a podcast and she can't remember which. So I can't currently credit the person who had the idea, but if you also heard it on a podcast and you know which, let me know and I will credit it. This tip is if you have clothes that are very worn and have very little wear left in them, take them on holiday with you and wear them when you're on holiday, when you're on vacation, for the last time. So you go on holiday with a suitcase full of clothes that have very little life left in them. Wear them one final time and then throw them away on holiday and come back home with an empty suitcase. And I think that's a really interesting idea. I also want to say in episode 200, I thanked all the previous guests, but I hadn't updated my guest list when I did that. So a massive extra sparkling thank you to Carrie Lagerstedt, who was not included on that list. And that is a tragedy. So big apologies and thank you to Carrie for being a guest who was also wonderful, and her lack of inclusion on that list is a reflection of me relying on a list I created a while ago. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to that Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Chirp Your Home, a decluttering and organising course for overwhelmed people. Amy, a declutter coach and professional organiser, has condensed down a range of tools and techniques which she's developed with clients over the past 5 years. Chirp Your Home is a course that uses a mixture of reflective exercises and practical tools with lots of options and opportunities to adapt methods to work for you as an individual. This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. The course is in audio format with accompanying worksheets, and it's split across 4 modules. If you're worried about finding the time to work through the course, Amy also runs a free body doubling group twice a week that you can use to work through the course in your own time. Visit chirpyourhome.podia.com, that's chirpyourhome.podia.com, and use voucher code OCHPOD for 15% off.